So I watched Star Wars The Last Jedi, and I thought this film was okay, but I was really expecting a lot more. My issues with the film mainly relate to its epic action sequences, in which characters inexplicably keep surviving situations in which they're exposed to the vacuum of space as a result of massive ship explosions. By any realistic logic, all of the film's main characters should have died several times over according to basic physics. Speaking of should have died, Poe Dameron became extremely unlikable in this film, with his disobedience getting 9 ships full of good people killed, and he even tries a coup d'etat against the resistance because he isn't getting his own way, like a petty child with no foresight. His brash stupidity and arrogance would have made his superiors fire, arrest, or potentially even shoot him for his treachery in real life, but instead they just stun him and talk about how badass he is. If nothing else, I would have expected the friends of the people who he got killed to have punched him in the face. Also, somehow Leia can survive being directly thrown into space and just end up in a hospital facility, despite the fact that all of the air in her lungs should have been pulled out in the vacuum and her liquids should have frozen solid in the cold. She should have died, but didn't, for no explained reason, hashtag Force Ex Machina. Oh, and the setup of this film feels like a retcon of the very premise of the previous film. For example, How did the First Order, who had just lost their enormous planet killer weapon and seemingly otherwise only had a few ships in the first film, suddenly overthrow the entire former Republic military in apparently only a matter of days, despite losing the enormous weapon they had as leverage against everyone else? Luke Skywalker also felt like a completely different character in the flashbacks of this movie. How can a guy who for years refused to give up on the notion of curing his father of evil attack his student? Admittedly, I know it was only after like a split second sort of uncertainty, but even so, just because he felt some evil growing inside of him. It felt like a complete 180 on everything Luke stood for in the original trilogy. As a result, the Luke I saw in this film wasn't the tragic broken hero they wanted me to see. It was an annoying, self-righteous hypocrite. And why on earth did he make a map in the previous movie to his most likely location, and stick it in R2-D2, the obvious place people looking for him would look, if he didn't want to be found? If he wanted to just go there to die, as he claimed, why didn't he just commit suicide? What was with the stupid Force cave mirror scene as well? And the movie completely forgot to show us how Rey got from Snoke's throne room back into the Millennium Falcon ready for the final battle when the First Order's soldiers should have been searching like crazy, and there is no way in hell that the First Order would have just let the Falcon get anywhere near Snoke's Star Dreadnought without stopping it. A hugely important scene is missing here. Speaking of things that should have been seen, why on earth would the rebels take unshielded troop carriers which are incapable of light speed to a nearby diamond planet in plain view of the dreadnought and all of the star destroyers attacking them, all of which are much faster? No self-respecting military commander would put all of their subordinates on such a suicide mission, especially when the planet they were going to was in plain view of Snoke's fricking ship. Also, Rey's backstory when revealed was hideously underwhelming given all the hype, and it seemingly contradicts the inclusion of a memory of Obi-Wan Kenobi's voice in the previous film. Captain Phasma was a waste of time. She barely did anything and then died like a wimp. To make matters worse, she was the only character wearing metal armour, and thus she should have been electrocuted when she was fighting Finn, but the writers apparently forgot that metal conducts electricity, something even a small child knows. With that said, her armour was able to deflect blasters, all of which makes me wonder why regular stormtroopers don't have such an armour, as it would be a great tactical advantage and significantly reduce casualties. But hey, it's not like the First Order are intelligently led. Snoke Snoke acts like a complete mind reader and mastermind, but he can't even tell who Kylo thinks is his true enemy. It's almost like he can only read minds properly when it's convenient for the plot for him to do so. To make matters worse, the fact that Rey supposedly saw Kylo's future as definitively turning to the light ruins any suspense or uncertainty about the outcome of the next movie. Also, the very nature of the Force is completely retconned in this movie once again. Sure, there was no mention of midichlorians in this time, thankfully, but now it allows even barely trained Jedi like Rey to move countless objects at once in order to save other heroes, when even in the Episode 2 Yoda vs Dooku fight, Force users as powerful as they could only use one or two objects at a time. Suddenly, Rey and Luke are much more powerful than any of the Jedi Masters in the prequel trilogy, who were somehow taken out by a small group of clones. The Luke Force projection versus Kylo scene was also stupid given what they did with Luke afterwards. It would have made far more sense to have simply had Luke fighting Kylo and been killed, but instead the movie saves Luke only to then have him disappear and become one with the Force pointlessly. Force Ghost Yoda also looked nothing like the Force Ghosts that we see in the original trilogy, because instead of being blue and translucent, he's opaque and has a weird glow around him for some reason. What was wrong with just being visually consistent with the other movies? But that's not even close to the end of this film's stupidity, since there's also a big, mostly pointless casino film that just felt there to fill out a huge section of runtime without adding anything of importance to the plot. Then there's the wasted character of Snoke. Sure, he was acted amazingly by Andy Serkis, but none of the questions we had about him were answered or looked to be answered. I also expected that the film would show that Finn had some force sensitivity in order to explain how he was able to survive and hold his own against Kylo Ren in the last movie, but nope, that's just another plot hole. The film also seems to be setting up a Rey, Finn, Rose love triangle for the next movie, but leaving something like that to so late in the series means it will be impossible to properly explore and be needlessly tear-jerking, since that's all love triangles ever are. Things I liked, however, are also abundant. Despite the extremely disjointed, plot hole-filled and appalling script, the film did balance a surprising amount of well-executed comedy with a dark atmosphere and tone. The amount of detail that went into the ship and setting designs was impressive, as were the creature effects, which were a near flawless mix of practical and CGI. The soundtrack was also probably the best of any Star Wars movie, and an enormous step up from The Force Awakens. #John Williams rocks. Though he did rock in Force Awakens, it just wasn't all that memorable. I also like how the film dealt with the lack of necessity of groups like Jedi and Sith in order to keep the Force in balance, and it was great to see how Kylo acted and changed upon being given a much greater seat of authority given his serious mental issues. The film was visually spectacular, thankfully dumping the awful lens flares of the previous film in favour of some epic visual effects and truly stunning space battles. Parts of the film had a real sense of fun that was unexpected given the darker turns of the story. The film was undeniably well cast, and General Hux became quite entertaining as he transitioned from genocidal control freak into force-abused lackey. Do these plus points outweigh the bad, however? Only if you're incapable of critical thinking. 4 out of 10, not recommended.